What job should marketing get done in a company?
Marketing and marketeers wear a lot of hats, but if we boil it down to, what really matters, it's this. Our job is to influence, to change how people think, how they act, how they move, to shape their perspective of a future that includes us and us being our product and our brand as part of the solution. A lot of companies still think or still treat marketing like a vending machine, right? Feed in some dollars, pull the lever, cronk, and get the lead. But real marketing, the stuff that drives growth over the long term, that's about creating demand, right? By educating buyers, earning trust, and influencing decisions before sales is even in the picture.
That's Yoon, and I'm sorry to interrupt him, but he's going to go on with a really great answer here because if you want to better understand marketing, he's your guy. While only having 7 years of experience in marketing, he both gets it theoretically and tactically. Yoon and I met over a LinkedIn post where I was sharing my reflections of moderating an event. Yoon shared that his organization was hosting an event and he was also going to be moderating. We were connecting over lessons, and it led me to think, Yoon gets it. Why not have him come on the show? Well, here he is, and here's our conversation. But before we get back to it, run the intro. Welcome to On Marketing. This is a show where we uncover what marketing is. I won't tell you what to think. I'll help you improve how you think about marketing and life. I'm Jordan Ogren, a marketing strategist by day and a podcast host by night. This was originally recorded on July 11th, 2025. All opinions shared in this podcast are individual views of the host and guests, not those of their employers or associate organizations. This content is intended for informational purposes and should not be considered professional marketing or life guidance. Listeners act on the information provided at their own risk. Thank you for being here.
This isn't just a nice philosophy. It's actually backed by data, right? I brought the receipts, you know, Gartner, Sixth Sense, BCG, they've all found the same thing. And that is that 85% or more of B2B buyers already have a short list of vendors in mind before they ever enter a buying process. And about 90% of the time, the vendor that they buy from is already on that short list. So this has huge implications for us marketers in how we think, because it means that we're not winning in the spreadsheets, we're not winning in the metrics that we pour over. We win it in the buyer's mind long before they ever enter a CRM field. And so we can't just educate our buyers when they are ready to buy and expect any form of stickiness there, because brands, as a brand marketer, brands live as this complex constellation of impressions, emotions, contexts, and cues. And the more robust and relevant that we build these connections, the more likely our brand is going to come to mind when need arises. And there's so much that we could unpack here, Jordan. It could fit into a whole other conversation, but one thread that I like to pull is that with marketing, we marketers really struggle with the effectiveness efficiency skill. And I'm going to borrow the words of Liam Moroney here, and I hope that I don't butcher it too badly. But we've created this culture that pushes for maximum efficiency, trackability, and predictable outcomes. And Liam says something really clever. He says, our dashboard metric mindset has made us short sighted to the point that we pursue metrics and we call that marketing. In my experience, effective marketing is rarely without inefficiency. So we have to become comfortable with the messiness of ideation, right? With being silly with ideas, uh, and overall just with the inefficiencies of the creative process. We have to become comfortable with creativity.
I love that, Yoon. And I think your original answer of influence is hard to truly track or measure. Like, how do you measure influence? I mean, I'm just thinking interpersonally, it's hard to know like what level of influence I have over this person or my children or whatever, because just inherently there isn't like, I guess maybe back in the day there used to just be influence based on eldership, and maybe that hasn't changed in other places, but I know America, we do not have as much respect, or the elders don't have as much influence on us. So it's something that I like, because you can't just, like, to your point, of vending machine, put dollars in and get influence out. There has to be like this empathy, all this. So how do you think about You talked a lot about it, but I would love just like more of a succinct answer of like, how do you think about building influence? Clearly educating when they're not ready to buy so you can get on that short list, but talk to me of some of your thoughts around how does marketing drive this influence, and maybe even, well, how do they do it in the wrong way? That's always sometimes a helpful way to look at things of like, how does marketing not build influence or actually destroy building influence?
I think that influence in some parts of marketing and even outside of marketing, it has become somewhat of a dirty word sometimes. That we've moved away from when it was my time, we used to call them influencers, but then now we've shifted over to content creators, right? To sort of and there's so much to unpack there about that particular rebrand. But building influence, I think the cool thing about marketing and specifically B2B marketing is that B2B buyers are just people at work, and people make decisions with emotions first, logic second, right? We click the button because something innate tells us to do so, and then we try and justify that with logic. So yes, a certain part of the job description for marketing is sort of like creating a vibe marketing, right? And vibing it out is sort of building that influence by telling the stories that our buyers care about, showing up consistently, and doing so with a personality, and turning founders and also upper leadership into evangelists, and uh, even better if you can turn customers into heroes. So I think sort of building influence is about being human first, and then again, not metrics first.
And that has, I think, a little parlay to what you were talking about, the inefficiency of marketing, that actually sometimes the best marketing is actually inefficient. And I heard kind of this talked about way back when Drift, I think there's still a company, but they had this like Seeking Wisdom podcast, and they talked about hand-to-hand combat, and that being very useful early on in a SaaS, a startup, just because scale is hard and you have to do the kind of the unscalable activities, just emailing someone to be like, hey, check out our podcast, where you would love for ads or some of these things. So I find that to be so inherent in good marketing, is this accepting. Maybe they don't like choose to do things inefficient. We're going to write with a typewriter versus a computer, but it's like we realize that there's going to be certain things like marriage or having children that is inefficient at the start, or inherently just it makes life more inefficient, but then after or throughout it, you just feel better when you have a child, even though they keep you up at night or whatever. So how do you wrestle with that of like accepting and dealing within the messiness and the inefficiency, as you kind of talked about earlier?
Yeah, it's hard. Like, I'm a perfectionist, so and marketing is inherently a small team of people, and so you can't do everything perfectly, especially with a small team. And marketing teams are getting leaner, right? That is the truth. But I also think that there is a rising trend that we are pushing back against the system optimized for attribution instead of impact. And I think that as more uh, CEOs understand the role of marketing, messy as it is, as long as it's impactful, you don't have to justify every dollar about behind it. And a name that comes to mind is Joshua. Josh was building Vector with Jess Cook. I think he really gets it, right? Because like you said, his drift, his X drift, I think, or his XZ5. So he really understands that part of just living in the messiness and sort of just pushing towards that. And I think that falls a little bit into brand versus performance marketing, because performance marketing is all about being able to track exactly every dollar, every ROI, whereas with brand, that's a bit harder to do.
That makes sense. And that is a large conversation too, as well, the whole brand performance. And usually I find with all those conversations, it's kind of a both and. It's not really either or. It's just
That's
like
right.
percent wise, or how do you want to kind of where you're at in the market or different things. But I find it to be important to kind of think about that. But yeah, it's interesting that there are those, I always hate that it's seemingly somewhat top down, in the sense of it, the CEO gets marketing, and there's been those like parodies of like fine CEOs who get marketing and all that. And I think there's a delicate balance of like cop outs of like
Definitely.
getting someone that sees it your way, but also like it is inherently challenging to do marketing with someone who has more of a sales focus, or which is weirdly enough where this podcast came from. Is like if we're all talking about marketing, but we haven't defined it. So then you're telling me do more marketing, and that's like sending one-to-one emails and stuff, which I'll do, and it's fine. But like to your point, is that building influence, or is that kind of salesy? Is that kind of gaining permission, or is it actually detracting from those people to want to talk to us? But if
Yeah.
that in your mind is marketing, kind of that kind of one-to-one or sales, if it kind of merge with sales, then you'll constantly say we need to do more marketing. There's some value I find in defining or taking a step back to say like, what is the outcome that we're working towards with our marketing? And I think influence is a great North Star to kind of aim towards. Yoon, what is something in your career in marketing that maybe a year, 2, 3 years ago, you believe something maybe not vastly different, but very different? So for me, just using an example, I used to think you need to create 100 pieces of content. I fell into that Gary Vaynerchuk kind of mental thing of like, just keep producing, where now I'm like, maybe quality is more important. Does anything stand out to you of where you believed one thing and now you've taken a bit of a radical shift, or you just think differently on, and it's probably important for marketers to think a little differently on too?
Jordan, I think that, there is an illusion that I've realized, and that is that we have a lack of data. I don't think that that's right. It's not that we need more information. As marketers, we're always information hoarders, right? How many fields can I put on a form field before we piss them off, right? We already have the right data. And that stems from the fact that the information that we collect is deeply skewed by internal context. The uncomfortable truth is that we are often the last to hear the voice of the customer. And when we do, it's through the filter of, sales from late stage deals or product usage patterns from power users, C-suite narratives, and which are sometimes actually, sort of shaped by board expectations. And don't get me wrong, like every one of these perspectives are available, but they don't tell us how buyers actually choose. They don't reveal how, what activity actually gets us into a buyer's consideration set. And they definitely don't help us craft messaging that resonates in their earliest moments of awareness, right? I see the bookshelf behind you. This is the exact problem that, Daniel Kahneman describes in Thinking Fast and Slow as the inside view. Because, we are forecasting based on the echo chamber of internal data, whereas the outside view is what we get from voice of customer research. Structured, repeatable, unbiased input from our buyers operating in market before they are in our CRM. And that's something that, I've just realized in recent times.
I love that, Yoon, because I fall into that kind of gathering too much info or too much, because I think there's never that point at which the data will tell you, hey, you have enough. You can just keep having that illusion, to your point. And I find it so fascinating that I've kind of had that insight for such a long time of like the customer has the answer, or the market is where the innovation, or the market is where our positioning shift should come from. And I was reading this recent old book that talks about how markets are conversations, and that makes so much sense, because like how he kind of frames it then is like, what's the best thing to do in a conversation, or how do you become really great at conversations? You listen. And when we're talking in the boardrooms and we're not listening, we're trying to talk to the market to tell them, hey, we think you should go this way,
That's
versus
right.
kind of listening to the market, hearing people, hearing even just like geopolitical, all these bigger things that kind of speak into the market, and then creating a narrative, creating something you were talking about that responds to it, that is interplaying the conversation already happening. How do you think about that as like markets are conversation? When I first read that, it like I never thought about it that way, but it was like, oh, that's why we can't just sit in our boardroom and come up with great kind of marketing initiatives, because the market has the conversation, like it's out there. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, clearly it seems you're aligned with that whole kind of concept that the market is a conversation and listening is kind of the best way to improve marketing.
I think that's the power of being an introvert. You do a lot more listening, and you do a lot more active listening than you do talking. And when you do listen, it's so much easier for people to open up to you and to sort of tell you exactly in their words what they are going through. And so it's just a really powerful skill that I think not not enough marketing teams utilize.
I'm introverted as well, or maybe like ambiverted. So I totally align with that, that it comes like easier to me to just listen, where I know some of my peers or different people are more
Yeah,
extros. So they kind of want to jump into the combo or start the combo. And I think there's probably ways to like work with who you are in marketing that not everyone might listen as well. But I just find over and over again, we're trying to like twist the arm of the market versus kind of dancing with the market to say, okay, we'll go with you versus like, no, take this step or swing when I want you to swing. And it's like,
that's right.
it's not how dancing truly works. I love it,
Yeah,
Yun. Well, I could talk to you forever about marketing. I think our theories and our ideologies align quite well. But I'd love to kind of maybe get to maybe a more important topic, which is life. Are you ready to hop into that sphere?
let's do it.
So, Yoon, when you think about, and this is just for you, when you think about life, what are you aiming for? What is the purpose of life to you?
I think the job of life is to live, and to live it in like intentionally. So I remember a conversation I had a while back with a good friend, Richie Merzian. He's an ex-colleague and now CEO of the Clean Energy Investor Group. So we were catching up over lunch. I had reached out to ask him for advice. And the very first thing, he said to me when we sat down was, how can I make this valuable for you? That one sentence shifted something in me, helped me shift my mindset in how I think about time, relationships, work, and life in general. Not as, yeah, like all these buckets, not as something to manage, but something to shape. Because it's all too easy to be carried along by the current. You've got work, emails, deadlines, doom scrolling, the big issues, little distractions. But I find that, if you have intention as your anchor, it allows you to choose your current instead of just floating downstream and then complaining about where you're being floated to. And it's tough. Like being intentional is hard. Like, but there's also the saying that this is hard and this is also hard. So you choose your hard, right? It's hard to get through the challenges and finish the job, but it's also hard to not have people's trust. So I look at it as that I just have to choose which hard do I want to manage. And going on from there, today, time is such a valuable currency. So being intentional is like thinking like an investor. Where am I spending or where am I investing my time, right? Am I passively doom scrolling on TikTok? I very well am. Yes, absolutely. But even that moment becomes a check-in, right? If I've blocked out time to doom scroll or intentionally do nothing, then that's fine.
I love that answer. The purpose of life is to live, and how you do that is by being intentional in some realms. I align with that, and I think it's interesting because we have as humans this ability, at least for me, I haven't lived in anyone else's shoes, but I have this ability to like just coast, kind of almost like go through my seat if I'm in the driver's seat, and all of a sudden I'm in the back seat. And whether it's doom strolling, whether it's a bar, like there's so many ways in which as humans we have this ability to just like go out of the driver. Like we can't leave our life, we can't stop living, but we can stop becoming intentional in just whatever way the wind's going and all those things you said. But I'd love to ask you, was there a moment, or was it a gradual point at which you wanted to be more intentional, or were you always this little intentional boy that was asking these really intentional questions, or was it this journey? Because for me, it's been a journey. So I'd love to hear how you become maybe more intentional or realize that intention was such, like you said, the anchor to life, which it really, I love that framing. So what was it for you, Yoon?
It's also a journey for me, and I wouldn't say I'm super intentional like 100% of the time. But I think I can't pinpoint an exact moment as to when I became more intentional. I think it's like you say, it's more of a gradual journey that I've just realized that I've been on this leg of the journey, and a lot of it has to do with like the people that I'm very lucky to have surrounded myself with, because like you were talking about, we are more than our job titles, right? We are sons or daughters, friends, neighbors, husbands, or even parents. I've got a new dachshund joining the family soon, right? I've got half finished house projects all around the house. I've got unread books piling up. a gym membership that silently mocks me. The list goes on and on. And so, being intentional, balls get dropped. And that's okay, as long as I'm aware of it and I'm intentional about it. And it's also helped me to, be more appreciative of who I surround myself with, and specifically people who live their life very intentionally within my orbit as well.
I think I find that there's this delicate balance of being serious, which is like almost tied to intentional. Like if someone's being intentional, there's within that there's a level of seriousness. They could be like joking, but it's like you're taking this serious. You're intentional about this person just had someone pass in their life, so I'm going to intentionally kind of reach out to them. There is something built into that of being serious, but then my thought is like sometimes like, and I think of like the Joker, why so serious? Like sometimes we can be too damn serious. Like just
Yeah.
like, yo, chill a bit. Like, and it seems though within your answer, you've already got to that point where it's like, there will be balls I drop, but I'm intentional about the ones that are glass and the ones that are rubber, the ones that'll bounce back up and the ones that if I drop, I'm not there for my kid's banquet or I'm not there for my wife. That'll be harder to rebuild and I have to glue that glass orb back together. How have you worked through that challenge of being too serious, but realizing that like not caring and unintentional is like just as bad or even worse than like being overtly serious about life?
Yeah, through trial and error. There are some times where I fucked up, and it's just putting my hand up and saying that, hey, I didn't realize that, I should have done this. And then, sometimes after doing something, I realized that, maybe I've invested too much time into that. And then looking forward, maybe the next time I don't put that much effort into it. And so I find that, maybe you don't have to be intentional about how you live every single facet of life. You can do it towards certain things that you care about more. So, for example, like Axel Sukianto, a LinkedIn friend who turned into a real life friend, he's so intentional with like Generate, right? The B2B marketing community in ANZ that he's building with Kayla, Kaylee, and Lara. They are also intentional about the way that they build it. And then you've got other people who are so intentional or also serious about how they build their business, but then they take a bit more of a laid back sort of attitude when it comes to other parts of their life. So I think it's through trial and error.
Yeah, learning as you either make mistakes or I find there's this Thomas Merton quote where I can put my ladder against the wall and I climb that wall and I look around and I see another wall that I realize I should have put my ladder against. And that's this whole concept of becoming super successful in life or getting that accolade and then realizing as the great Gatsby, it doesn't fulfill or it does. So I find that as you touch on that, that is interesting. We do get to choose. And as you're talking too, I kept kind of floating focus or passion or energy along with intentional because you're saying these people are intentional about building something. To me, that's like they're focused on it. That's their passion. That's the thing that they're giving their energy to. And then that kind of maybe hints at this thought of like being intentional drains your battery. So like it is quite frankly impossible to be intentional all the time or like serious all the time because you'll just be like drained or so then it's that what you're kind of talking about of choosing or life chooses for you what to focus on, what to care about, what matters most. And maybe that's intentional and like what matters most for some people it is the business, it's this group, it's a community because it maybe is giving life to others and I'm not the one that's going to judge to be like, that's what you're focusing like all of your time on building the sandcastle versus like a family or versus some of these other things. How do you think about that decision of what to be intentional about or answering like what is most important right now? That's a really hard question. I've tried to answer or have not found maybe many answers, but at least asking it maybe is a start.
Yeah, that is still something that I'm struggling with, to be really honest. And, I think the way that I currently think of how to approach it is sort of thinking, it's sort of trying to dip my toes into it a little bit and trying to see if it's worth the effort or, how cold the water is before I actually do a head plunge into it, basically, and just divert all my time into that.
That makes sense, Yune. That makes sense. I want to ask you a question, but I will ask the question and then kind of preface why I'm asking it. So my question is is there a fear that's attached to being intentional? Now, for me personally, I have this fear that at the end of my life, I will look back and like I will kind of have a difference in how I viewed myself to how others viewed me. Not in a sense of like, oh, they have some holy view of Jordan, but just the sense of like I was helpful, I was a good person to these people, and I never want that illusion to be there of like I'm on my deathbed and my kids like you were just a piece of shit father. And it's like, how did I miss that? And how did I put my focus and my intentionality on something that then in the last moments of my life, I'm like, damn it, I've misplaced my intention. So that bringing to the present is why I'm in just immensely focused and addicted to being intentional about my life, being serious about it, not dicking around as the term is, because it's like we only get one life and I do not want to be at the end of it and having to miss kind of connection with who I wanted to live and die as and who everyone around me is seeing me as like, he was more focused on this or that. What is there anything for you that you fear? And maybe it's a daily fear, or it's like for me more of that end of the life of like, and that leads to me being more intentional. And maybe hopefully you're not as fear driven as me. So totally fine to be like, no, I have no fears, but I'd love to just hear if you have anything that drives that intentionality.
I didn't before. No, I don't think so. So I have, again, very lucky to have people around me that, I've really opened myself up to be very transparent across the journey that I'm trying to build myself. And, with it, how I'm sort of building my life with intentionality. So I find that if I'm very lucky to have a wife who stands beside me and really is the rib that got plucked out of my rib cage, and she lets me know if I ever do anything that sort of she doesn't think is aligned with my original goal, or she keeps me in check basically, right? And I have friends like that, close friends who we catch up quite frequently as well, and so I have these sort of checks put in place that I'm very lucky to have. That basically helps me not to have that fear.
Yeah, friends, family, they're great gifts in that sense of kind of elevating us or holding us to that best version of ourselves. Which is to your point of transparency, it's a bit of a two-way street because if you don't tell them who you want to be or what your original goal is, they're kind of holding you to their own figment in their imagination of who they want you to be. So having that conversation of like, Jordan is this calm, this, all these kind of words that then we can both look at and be like, yeah, you're not there right now, versus like, oh, that's your opinion that I'm not being calm or whatever. So yeah, it's definitely a dialogue which requires transparency to be like, this is who I want to be, and I know I'm not there yet, which is a little vulnerable to stay. But I find that to be where a lot of growth comes from.
It's hard being that vulnerable, but oftentimes if you take the first step to be vulnerable, people tend to open up to you a bit more, and you find that that's where you build the closest relationships, and good things come out of that.
100%, 100%. So, Yoon, to wrap up this podcast, there is this movie. You may or may not have watched it. It's called Inception. Leonardo DiCaprio is in it. It's about implanting, incepting dreams into people's minds. Usually those are malicious dreams. I'm going to have you sell your company. I'm going to have you give me this or that. But we're going to switch it and be more benevolent. If I gave you the power to go in the minds of every person, not just marketers, we're staying in the life realm, every human on this planet, and tomorrow they wake up and the idea you incept in their minds, they think is their own, and they live out of that for the rest of their life. What is the idea you incept in every human's mind for tomorrow?
Look, I think if there's something that you would I would want put into my head is that sense of community, because I think that we are created to be social creatures, right? And so there's been times in my life where I felt lonely, I felt separated out from a certain group, and that is just not a feeling that anyone should ever experience. So I think it's really important to sort of have your people build your community. So if there's something that could be sort of implanted and being put into people's minds, is to have that sort of sense of community for them to wake up, go out, and find their people.
I love that, Yune. And I think if not now, definitely our world is in a time where we could come together a bit more and to see the unity versus the division. So
Absolutely.
I really hope maybe a few of us wake up tomorrow with that idea. So thank you, Yune, so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom, your stories. I really appreciate your time.
No, at all. Thank you for having me, Jordan.
And this is the end of the podcast. What one idea or topic of conversation stood out to you today? Write it down, share it with a friend, post on social. The main thing is take action. That's how we go from theory to mastery. We need to practice. We need to put it into practice. Thank you for listening and being here, and I hope you tune in next week.